I'm doing well, trying to stay warm and dry here in freezing, raining Detroit, but
Okay.
otherwise, no complaints.
Okay, so that's what we were gonna double check. So which you're there right now. You're gonna be in Detroit and then you go to Charlotte as well. Do you go to Philly too?
I do, and then given the baton back to my guy Jason Anderson for the last two games of the road trip, Milwaukee and Phoenix. So I'll be here I'll be on the road for the next three.
Got it. Well, I'm gonna tell you right now. We'll just get this out the way now. You need a cheesesteak. Don't listen. Whatever Kyle Draper, I said D'Alessandro's. That's good too. You go to Ish Kabibbles, okay? Go to Ish Kabibbles, and they will take care of you. So let's just start there. We can talk about a little bit more at the end of the call. But yeah, good to have you on as always, Chris. Let's go Kings to start. Okay,
Okay.
our Chris Watkins. He's messing up the vibes in here, Chris,
Me?
talking about the Detroit Pistons and he's
Oh.
worried. We're not doing this, right? I mean, there's no way, no Kate Cunningham, no Isaiah Stewart. It's a G League team. We're not doing this, right? It's not gonna happen, okay? It's not possible, right?
I would be stunned if the Kings came to Detroit and did not play well, particularly after how Sunday went against New Orleans. Now, if this were like a Sunday start back in Sacramento and it was like a 1 p.m. start tip, something like that, and the Pistons are missing some guys, then yeah, maybe my antenna would be up in terms of the Kings possibly playing down to their competition and potentially getting upset. But I would imagine this is a pretty frustrated team, a pretty angry team, given the way things went Sunday against New Orleans. And so, there's an opponent here that's ripe for a blowout in Detroit, and I think the Kings would gladly acquiesce.
Chris, it kind of feels like to me the Kings have benefited from some fortunate results, more so towards the end of the year. But then I think we've seen that play hasn't really gotten better. And now we're starting to see some negative results when it comes to the Kings. What do you kind of feel like has changed with this team in the past 2 weeks? I mean, really from that Timberwolves game on, I mean, the loss to the Blazers, the loss to the Hornets, I mean, having to have a huge comeback against the Hawks and then, the double overtime against the Magic and then the huge loss to the Pelicans. Just what do you feel like has really changed within this team?
Yeah, I think last year when everything was so new and fresh, there was a certain level of excitement with it, and it all felt, like my thing coming out of last year was never going to feel the same as last year. Like the come up
Right.
is always the most exciting part, and I think that was true not only for the fans and the organization, but also the players themselves, right? And there were some tweaks made this offseason to the system and to what they want to be offensively. There was more put on Keegan Murray's plate, both offensively and defensively. And on the offensive end, that meant fewer opportunities for Kevin Herter. And Kevin Herter, obviously a rhythm player, has not been nearly the same player he was offensively for spurts that he was last year. And then Harrison Barnes is, getting up there in age. I don't know if I'm reading too much into the fact that Harrison Barnes has like a little knee brace thing that he's wearing, but he's 31 years old. Obviously not old in real life terms, but maybe in NBA terms might be getting up there. And he's at the latter stages of his career potentially, and maybe he's not the same guy that he was early on in his Kings tenure, right? So I think there's a confluence of factors that might lead to a few of the ancillary guys on the margins not playing as well as they did last year. And I think that, that could have a domino effect in terms of how much you're relying on De'Aaron Fox and how much you're relying on Domantas Sabonis. So, I think going into the deadline, and something I'll certainly be keeping an eye on during this road trip is does this team need to shake things up from a roster perspective, right? The trade deadline's about a month away, and is that going to be something that they need to do to improve, or can the improvements come internally? I know Monty McNair, particularly last year's deadline, made it a point to say, we think our biggest growth is going to come internally, that the roster that they have can just improve as it is. And I think we're seeing that maybe plateau a little bit here midway through the second season of Mike Brown's tenure. And I'm wondering if that's going to lead to some moves being made.
Chris Biderman, Candlestick Chronicles, also the Sacramento Bee. Chris, real quick before we get to Niners stuff, Kevin Herter was in a starter practice jersey yesterday, and people were saying, oh, is he going back into the starting lineup? Did you see that? Do you care? Are people just bored?
I didn't see it. I'm not going to answer whether or not I care, but I will say, I will say that, you know, when the Kings were on their road trip and they made the change to the starting lineup, I believe it was in Memphis, with Chris Duarte starting over Kevin Herter. Chris Duarte was in a practice jersey with a starter's practice jersey. So I think, you know, maybe there is something to read into that. You know, I don't know. We'll have to see. That's you've piqued my interest, though. I'll make sure to ask Mike Brown and maybe ask around before the game tonight.
There you go. All right, now let's get to the Niners. The Chargers have asked for permission to interview defensive coordinator Steve Wilks. You surprised by that? And does it say more about, I guess, the Niners fans' expectations and the Niners organization's expectations? The fact that really Steve Wilks, a lot of people thought he had somewhat of a tough season until he comes down on the sidelines, and even still, he's willing to, our teams are willing to reach out to him and see, hey, we think you can lead a whole team. Were you surprised by that? And do you think he moves?
I would be surprised if he got a head coaching job, frankly. I think one of the unfortunate things about the NFL's Rooney Rule policy is that teams will do these interviews without really the expectation of those guys being real candidates, right? And
Yeah.
I know whether or not, you know, that you talk to people in the league, and some people are even reluctant to interview for these jobs because sometimes, you know, if you're trying to move up in NFL circles, whether it's a coaching job or a personnel job, if you are interviewing but you're not getting those jobs, like, people look at that, right? And so some people are reluctant to say to go interview for a job knowing that they're not going to get it because it could potentially look bad down the road when, you know, when other future employers are saying, well, why didn't you get this job? What went on there? And that's not to say that Steve Wilks is necessarily going to have to deal with that. That's just more of my commentary on the Rooney Rule overall. But no, I would be surprised. I mean, the Chargers seem like a possible Jim Harbaugh candidate. I know Mike Vrabel is probably going to be one of the most sought after candidates now that he's gone from Tennessee, and these are obviously two white guys, and teams that have openings are required by the Rooney Rule to interview minority candidates. So Steve Wilks might be filling that quota, so to speak. And so I think, I don't love the Rooney Rule. I love, you know, I'm in on the idea of improving opportunities and for minority candidates, obviously, but I don't know that forcing teams to interview them when they might clearly have their eyes elsewhere, I don't know that necessarily solves the problem. But you know, I do think it's good for Steve Wilks overall. Like, he had a good season. I think, you know, to a man, anybody who was in that Carolina Panthers locker room and involved with that organization, maybe with the exception of David Tepper last year, believe that Steve Wilks did a really good job with the Panthers. And so could be a fact-finding mission for the Chargers to see what's up with Steve Wilks. You know, it never hurts to get as much information and about as many candidates as possible. But overall, like, I would be kind of surprised if he got a head job after just 1 year with the Niners. But no, it doesn't really surprise me that he's part of this process.
Interesting. And we're also hearing a ton of, the Niners are being asked about Adam Peters as well, their assistant GM. Yeah. Just what can you really tell us about Adam Peters, somebody who I wasn't super familiar with, but seems to be thrown in a lot of these open GM jobs?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because Adam Peters is probably the most important personnel voice, within the organization when it comes to just scouting personnel, operating the scouting department. John Lynch is kind of the overseer of everything, right? He's sort of the connector within the organization and the front-facing, face and voice, the guy who does a lot of media. And so, that's John Lynch is not the GM who's like Trent Baalke, right? Trent Baalke was very much the guy who lives in his film room and is just grinding tape and has a big scouting background. John Lynch is more of the CEO type, right, so to speak. So, and part of that delegation was allowing Adam Peters to really take on the head personnel job. And so when it comes to just purely evaluating talent, Adam Peters has been really indispensable for the 49ers since they've developed this roster that's, arguably one of the best in the league. He's a Bay Area guy. I know it's a dream of his to be working for the 49ers. I don't know exactly what he makes, but I would guess for an assistant GM, it's way up there, right? And there's a potential that, John Lynch has hinted at, or at least been a candidate for like the Amazon job, right? Doing TV that would pay him $20 million a year. And I'm sure, the 49ers would have no problem turning the reins over to Adam Peters if and when John Lynch ever stepped away. So I wonder if Adam Peters looks at it and says, well, maybe in 3 or 4 years, I could be the GM of the 49ers, still make relatively close money as an assistant GM here, or does he really want to be a GM and run his own shop elsewhere, move out of the Bay Area where he grew up, and then obviously make a little bit more money in the short term. But no, in terms of him being a GM candidate, I would have to think he's one of the best GM candidates in the league, and he's been interviewing for a few years now. And so the way the 49ers have been operating, it's, John Lynch is sort of the overseer. Adam Peters is the head personnel guy, and Kyle Shanahan is the guy pulling the trigger really on all the offensive players for sure. So Adam Peters would be a really big loss. I'm curious to see if he feels urgency to go get a GM job elsewhere, or if he would just kind of wait in the wings to see what happens with John Lynch and potentially replace him in the 49ers GM chair.
Chris Biderman, Candlestick, Chronicles, Sacramento Bee. Enjoy your time out there. Get some Detroit-style pizza, whatever.
Enjoy that free Wingstop, Chris.
Yeah, right.
Thank you. Free Wingstop. What's happening? What?
Oh, every time the Pistons win, you get 5 free wings.
Oh, stop it. Why would you say that? Don't listen to him, Chris. Chris, thank you for joining us. Can't wait to have you next week when we discuss who the Niners will be taking on in the NFL playoffs. Talk soon.
Appreciate it. I'll get some lemon pepper for lemon pepper. Lemon pepper is my move at Wingstop.
That's totally justifiable. That's number 2 for me.
Great stuff. Great stuff, Chris. Chris Biderman, Candlestick, Chronicles, and the Sacramento Bee. When we get back, we will talk about the possible outcomes for the 49ers, and we will also discuss a star player that is 9 games away from not making the amount of games to be an MVP. We'll tell you who that is when we get back. Stiles and Watkins, Sactown Sports.